Hi, welcome again. It's Chris, and we are part 3 on our glazing technique here, and we're doing a great scene, a nice boat in a channel with a nice factory in the background there, and a nice seawall here, nice interesting stone kind of feel to that. Some foreground, we have some grasses and some interesting bushes here, and we'll do a little more detail. So essentially, on part 3, we've got to the point where we've done our first glazing in part 1, which was our sky colors, the blue, and into our water section, and as well as some light blue. And we said that that was essentially a lot of water for our first glazing. Not so much paint, but a lot of water to get that lighter sky feel and the feeling of the lightness of the water and the coolness of the water, the blue. And then we let that dry completely 100%, took a break, came back to part 2, and then in part 2 we started developing the buildings here, our brick buildings with the red brick and the chimneys and the interesting gray roofs with maybe some interesting maybe some tiles on the roof there, some nice grayish blue colors, some cool kind of colors. And we did our foreground here on part 2, some grass, a little bit of splashing. We repeated the colors. Again, to keep harmony with our painting, we try to repeat the colors throughout our painting. So here you'll see some reds and some cadmium red, some uh, burnt siennas mixed in as well with the greens and the golds. And now we're going to use our glazing technique for this part 3, after this fully dried. So we let this dry. Part 2, we let that completely dry. And now we're going to do part 3. So in between your glazings, you're always letting it dry completely and trying to let things settle a bit on your painting, which will give you a better end result where things don't mingle and mix too much. But you do like to have a little of the mixing and mingling of your colors and your waters, but not to the point where it starts to affect the defined boundaries of your painting and what you're looking to achieve as far as your boundaries. Here we have the boundary of the seawall, so we left that boundary with a little bit of a dry paper here in between, and we can always match this up a little bit better if we wanted to, but it looks good like that. So we have a nice defined line across here where that wall is, and we kept a nice defined line under the roof where it meets the wall, the bricks. So the roof and the bricks, we tried to keep that line defined. So we left that dry and we didn't let the paints mix too much in that area. And it's the same with this roof here, this location. We painted around the boat so we could leave the boat white, and that'll give it a really prominent look in the painting. The boat is a focal point, one of the focal points of the painting, as well as this brick factory. And then we'll have some detail here in the foreground. We'll make another focal point maybe here with some branches and so forth maybe. Okay, so let's get started. We'll try to, on this part 3, we'll make it a goal to get some of the trees in the back here behind these buildings. So some of the leaves and the foliage behind the buildings. We'll try to do some details in the boat. Maybe some details here in the foreground. We'll probably make this a 4-part series, so we won't rush too much and try to do too much on this part. And the key here is, as each video here, each part, we're using probably more or less, for the most part, less water each time we're going into the painting. So we're kind of, again, we're using that glazing technique where the first parts are more water, lots of water, and then as we continue on, we're using less and less water in more rich colors from our palette, more darker, richer colors with less water, mostly paint, with a little bit of water to move it around and get it on there. Okay, so let's do some foliage. So the first thing we do when we come back after our break, and we let everything dry, we take a paper towel, clean up our palette so we have a nice clean palette to start with. And we're going to go in and do some sap green, maybe some olive green, and maybe some cobalt blue. So we have a little bit of maybe a little bit of French ultramarine blue. And we'll do some tree shapes. And we'll leave that edge of the roof there. So let's try to keep some highlights. We could lose a few spots if we want, but let's keep a few of the highlights. So you can see there I'm keeping some highlights on the top of that roof. And then over here we're using more of the bluish color that gives us a feel of distance. As you can see, again, I'm leaving a highlight on that roof, and that gives us that real nice feel of sunlight on the roof. And I'm just having some fun here with the tree shapes. I'm not getting too fussy. I'm leaving some highlights on the top of the chimney there. Here I'm going to try to paint around that mast of the boat. So as you can see, there's a mast that I drew in with pencil when I did my contour drawing. And so here, since we're taking our time, and we can paint around that and leave that mast. We can make sure we leave that visible so that when we go to do the very final details of the boat, we can sort of have that mast feeling like it's showing through the complete painting. So I went around it, I painted around it, so that's negative shape painting, of course, as we call that. So I painted around that. And some more green over here. A couple splashes. And I often work around the painting. And I'm using the splashing technique here for the trees. All right, that looks pretty good. Now we can also, and I left some spaces in between the splashes and the, sometimes it's good when we're painting leaves of trees and tops of trees to leave a little space in between things, to leave some light areas showing through. That looks good. Okay, and then here, again, we always consider where the light is coming from in a painting. So when I did the preliminary sketch, I just did the contour drawing from memory from some paintings I'm thinking of when I'm drawing this, from just some ideas that I remember doing a few paintings a couple of years ago, and I was sort of trying to remember back to when I did those paintings. So I'm kind of I was using my memory as to draw this particular sketch here and painting. So when I did that, I couldn't recall exactly where the light was coming from in the painting, the one that I recall doing a couple years ago. So while we're painting this here, we have choices. We can decide where we want to have the light coming from. So I'm still I think the last thing I'll do is add in the shadowing. So as you can see here with the glazing technique, you can kind of delay, in a sense, your shadowing for your light source a little bit, because you can paint everything, and then when you do your final glazing on the painting, then you can add in your darkest shadow areas, let's say. But it is good to have your ideas of where the light is coming from definitely in the beginning. But since I was really concerned about the glazing ideas here, I didn't plan so much to figure out exactly where the light's going to be shining and where the shadows are. Okay, so we have some good darks going, some final stages of the glazings. And let's work in the boat a little bit. So here with the boat, I think I'm just going to use some of the mix we have from the trees, this section of trees. I'm going to try to use some of that color on the boat. And that also, when we use the same colors, it ties the whole painting together. There was some green mixed into this foreground already, but I'm just adding a little more. So in a sense, if we're tying in all our colors all together with our painting, it gives it a real nice feeling of harmony and making sense. And then I'll just and there I just added a little shadowing of that green color into the water. I'll put in some windows on the boat. Again, repeating the colors, the same colors. You can see here my mixtures here. They're pretty much the same colors. Maybe one a little darker with the windows here. And then to make it a little more interesting, I might pick up a little bit of burnt umber, burnt sienna, burnt umber, maybe a little French ultramarine blue to get a little darker tonal value there. And that's going to be better to do when it completely dries. So we'll do another part. We'll do part 4, and we'll get our darkest darks into the painting, and maybe a few white highlights here and there with a little bit of titanium white paint. And maybe we'll do some shoreline here. So I'm just mixing up a little bit of raw sienna. Okay, we'll see you in a few seconds for part 4.